Aloha mahalo as we look at OKO Wrist Lock number 6, once again in purple button material. Taking it a step further from number 5, now introducing a lock of our own on top of the wrist lock. So once again, it is our opponent's right hand to our left hand wrist grab. My left foot slightly forward, pre-position number 2. The attack is coming from 12 o'clock, my green zone. When he grabs my wrist, once again, we're going to step out, pull, manipulating his height and his depth, and poke. I'm going to up clock with my right foot towards 9 o'clock, circle the hand up and over to re-grab. Like number 5, I'm going to butterfly and replace my left hand with my right. But now instead of letting go with my left, my elbow is going to come up and over his arm, and I'm going to pull him into me where there's no gap between his ribs and my hip. I'm going to bring him in, his arm underneath mine, and I'm going to drop my height to bring him down to the ground. I can choose to then follow up as I would like. Let me grab the stick to represent his arm. Once again, stick represents his arm, is grabbing my left wrist. Step out. Notice I'm pulling him down and in with a poke. I'm going to come up clock and re-grab his wrist. I'm going to replace my hand here. As I do so, I'm going to actually strike with my elbow just below his elbow. As I control him, I'm going to suck him in, and as I do so, notice my left elbow is going to go up and over his arm, which is the stick. Then I'm going to drop my height and pull his wrist up towards me using my armpit as a fulcrum. In other words, here's his arm. I'm going to use my armpit as the fulcrum to control the rest of his body. Continuing pressure on the wrist. Going to bring his wrist up towards my head and drop my height. I can choose to, if I want to, lift up with my upper body. I've dropped here, but if I lean back, I can actually cause a break in the arm. I've got what's called 3 points contact. I've contacted his wrist, my body is contacting his forearm, my armpit is approximately where his elbow is, slightly above. I have 3 points contact. If I push, pulling the arm towards me and pushing out with my chest, I can actually affect a break. With that, this has been OKO Wrist Lock number 6. Stay tuned for concepts and principles. As we look at OKO Wrist Lock number 6, once again, look in the concepts, principles, and the lessons that are within it. So once again, as I step out and in, as I step out, I'm going to modify our opponent's height, width, and depth, giving us time. We have a distraction strike with the poke. We have a creating distance with the up clock, like we did in wrist lock number 5. Now we have a re-grab and replacement with a butterfly, like we did in number 5. Controlling his wrist with my left hand and then replacing it with the right so that my left hand can be used for something else. In this case, my left elbow. So now we get introduced to the fulcrum. We get introduced to 3 points of contact. Once again, push, pull, rowing the canoe. The idea of zero gap and sitting on the leg. What do I mean by these? So once again, once I have his wrist, this is his arm, and I've struck with my elbow, and I come up and over to control it, placing his elbow underneath my armpit. Once again, now I have 3 points of contact on the bad guy. I have 1 point of contact with my hands on his wrist. The second point of contact is my chest and his arm. The third point of contact is both my body and my arm over his elbow. Those are 3 points of contact. With those 3 points of contact, if I modify how they work, I can bend the object, even something as strong as the bone. Much like if I were to take this rubbery stick and I've got 3 points of contact, one at either end and my center. I don't think you can really see how far I can bend this stick. So we're going to do the same thing with his arm. I got 3 points of contact. I'm going to pull up with my hands to pray towards the skies. And if I really want to be mean, all I need to do is pull towards me with my hands, towards my right shoulder, and push out my chest to bring this type of motion and hyperextend that elbow. This is 3 points of contact. 1, 2, and 3 over here with my elbow and body. Once again, I'm going to push and pull. Pushing with my shoulder and armpit, pulling with my hands at his wrist. That is the push-pull rowing the canoe. Now, there's a new introduction of what's called zero gap. We get this from an American Kempo technique called crossing talons, in which as I step back, he grabs my wrist. I'm going to point my fingers to the sky, re-grab. I'm going to step in towards him, and as I do so, here's his arm. My hand's going to come up towards the shoulder, and I'm going to suck him in. Literally to where his arm, his armpit, is going to be in my hip. We want a zero gap. In other words, there's no space between his ribs and armpit and my hip. This allows me greater control and actually allows me to sit on his leg. I wish one of my students was here to show you this. We will do this maybe in a seminar coming up or in another opportunity. But literally from this point, you can sit on our opponent's leg and continue to control them. Number one, you've canceled their ability for mobility by putting your weight on their leg. But now with a fulcrum on their arm, you can modify their height and their width at will. You can literally have a conversation with your opponent, what would in Christian Kempo we would call a mercy point. You're at a point in which you have control over the situation and you can de-escalate it. Or you can wait for authorities to arrive by controlling your opponent. Once again, what lessons do we have here? Once again, there's a lot of new ones here in OKO Wrist Lock number 6. We have the zero gap, we have sitting on the leg, and 3 points of contact. These are going to come up in the future, but they start right here in Wrist Lock number 6. So we have modifying our opponent's height, width, and depth, giving us time. We have a distraction strike to the eyes. We have, once again, the up clock pizza slice. We have the re-grab with the butterfly. We have 3 points of contact with his wrist, his arm, and his elbow. We have push-pull, rowing the canoe. We have the zero gap between his body and ours. And we have the sit on the leg / what I call the human chair. There's a lot of good stuff here in OKO Wrist Lock number 6. I hope you enjoy it the way I have. With that, this has been a deep dive into OKO Wrist Lock number 6. Aloha and mahalo.